Hello and welcome to our weekly Parshas share with the commentary of the Alshich. We are doing Parshas Behar, and I know this is a few days late. I can only apologize because, as I think you know, I was in England for just under a week, and my schedule is completely thrown off as a consequence. However, I'm doing my best to make this up, which is what we're doing now. As usual, this share is sponsored. And if you'd like to have the share sponsored to commemorate somebody who's passed away, for a refuah shalema for someone, or a simcha, then please contact me, email me at ask@askrabbiyy.com, ask@askrabbiyy.com. This week's share is sponsored for refuah shalema of a little boy, a little baby boy who's waiting for serious operation, or Chaim ben Chana Yehudis. A little girl in Eretz Yisrael, is the very little baby girl who is very not well, but started to recover, so our prayers will help enormously. Yehudis Bas Chaya Malka. And also for the Aliyah of Neshama of my wife's late uncle who just passed away, a superbly wonderful person, Chaim Eliezer ben Yaakov. And that's who the shir is dedicated to for this week. Parshas Behar. In 1867, there was a famous book published, even today it's still read, and it's by probably America's greatest man of letters, who was, of course, Mark Twain. And Mark Twain, in the book, in the chapter called Returning and Redemption, he and a big group of American tourists visited the Mediterranean, Italy, etc. He got to the Holy Land, descending from Lebanon down through the Galilee to come, of course, to Jerusalem, the heart of Israel. This is what he writes. There's not a solitary village throughout its whole extent. That's the Jezreel Valley. Not for 30 miles in either direction. One may ride 10 miles hereabouts and not see 10 human beings. For the sort of solitude to make one dreary, come to Galilee. Nazareth is forlorn. Jericho lies a smoldering ruin. Bethlehem and Bethany in their poverty and humiliation, untenanted by any living creature. A desolate country, whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds. A silent, mournful expanse, a desolation. We never saw a human being on the whole route, hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Right, that's from the border of Lebanon to Jerusalem. We never saw a human being on the whole route, hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of the worthless soil, has almost deserted the country. Of all the lands there are for dismal scenery, Palestine must be the prince. The hills barren and dull, the valleys unsightly deserts inhabited by swarms of beggars with ghastly sores and malformations. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes, desolate and unlovely. And in writing this, and the veracity I don't think can be doubted, there's a contradiction. And the contradiction is when he writes, whose soil is rich enough and yet can't produce anything. Somewhat strange, as we'll see from the Alshich and the Sfas Emes in this week's shir. The soil is not just rich enough, the soil is remarkably rich, and yet it lies desolate. And the reason for that is, in 1867, there were only a few Jews there. As we'll see in the words of the Sfas Emes, and certainly in the words of the Alshich, what was missing was Jews. And the land of Israel has a special affinity for Jews, and Jews have a special affinity for the land of Israel, and each has a special effect on the other. As the Gemara says, the very Torah that Jews learn is enhanced by the air of the land of Israel. So let's just remind ourselves how the parsha starts off, that we are late in coming to this week, and again with apologies. So Parshas Behar, and it says, "V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe b'Har Sinai," and Hashem speaks to Moshe on Mount Sinai. Lemar to say, Daber Bnei Israel speaks to the Jewish people, Martal and say to them, when you all come to the land of Israel, Asher Ani I said, which I'm giving to you, the earth will observe a Shabbos to Hashem. a Shabbos to Hashem. Fine. Of course, the question really is, what is this Shabbos to Hashem? This is, of course, the Shemitah year. We've got, and then, of course, then it's going to be a Yovel. So basically, you've got 7 years, a cycle of 7 years. And in the 6th year, that's when all agricultural land agriculture stops. There's a year where the land lies fallow, and then the cycle repeats itself, culminating in 7/7 when it comes to the Yovel, the Jubilee. Of course, that's referred to in English. That's the real focus of what we're talking about here in the Parsha. Okay, so let's consider this from the point of view initially of the Sfas Emes. And he says something interesting, which will lead us, Kabbalistic, of course, being Sfas Emes, Chosid. He says the following thing. He quotes a Medrash Rabbah. And the Medrash Rabbah says the following thing. Mois v'chaim b'yad Alshich. It's a posset in Mishli Yud Ches, posset Kofal. Life and death depend on the mouth, on the tongue, on the ability to speak. And he says the following thing, reading on Gachelas, quoting from a Medrash Rabbah. Gachelas nefach bo. If there is an ember, a coal, which is like an ember, if you blow on it, then the fire that's inside the burning ember is released and can reignite and spread. If you rock it though, but if you spit on that ember, the same mouth is now, instead of blowing on it, is spitting on it. It extinguishes the last flame contained, concealed, constricted within the ember. So everything lies in the mouth, and that is the mouth of the human being. It can ignite or it can extinguish. It can be positive or it can be negative. Let's see what the Sfas Emes has to say. Ki vada yesh chayas Hashem baruch b'kol dover shemalin. There is an element, as it were, of God in everything in the world for the very simple reason that God created and creates everything in the world. Ki ba'araisa baruch kuchabriko esaham. Because it was from the very, as the Zohar says, it was from the Torah itself. God wrote the Torah first. It was the blueprint. And from that, he created the entire world. That means to say everything in the world is created from the blueprint of the Torah, which was written by God. So it's got, as it were, God contained in potential in everything in the world. But Torah nikras Eish. Now that's everything in the world. Now the Torah is likened to Eish and Torah, the famous organization, Yeshiva. And there is the koyach, the potential, and the energy of the Torah also contained in everything. So he says, but rather like that ember, it is contained and constrained within the ember, waiting to burst forth or waiting to be extinguished. But and it's appropriate to try and find what the Torah significance, and indeed, if I can use that rather arcane and archaic phrase, holiness, is contained within every single thing. Oh, and that means within every single human being as well. And that is liberated, that godliness, that holiness within every little thing is liberated by the mouth of a human being or extinguished by the mouth of a human being. Interesting stuff, Kabbalistic. I'm sure you agree. And that's why it says, embraces God blew into the mouth of the soul, into automation. The soul enters the body through the mouth, and of course, eventually, when a person is 120 years or whatever age, then it leaves through the mouth as well. Okay. But that's written the Shmarl, the Yaz, called over because and therefore, you've got to be careful because your mouth can bring something to life or can kill it. And of course, as we said at the beginning, Moves V'chaim B'yad Alshich. But life and death are activated through the mouth. Because if you use your mouth properly, then you can literally liberate holiness from any single thing. But Gashra is Hain and Rakok, but you can determine that it will not have that liberation and will die also through the mouth. And that's the idea of spitting on it and extinguishing the chaos. Good. So let's read this little paragraph as well. That is to say that applies to the entire world. As Jews perfect themselves, spiritually go up, so too does the world. We are, as it were, blowing our soul onto the world or elements of the world, all the elements of the world, and elevating and releasing the holiness that's within it. Particularly so, he says, when it comes to Shemitah. The land, the idea, as this week's Parsha talks about, of letting the land lie fallow, which, as sadly the Gemara says, all the exiles of the Jewish people were provoked, it says the Gemara, because the Jewish people did not observe Shemitah. So the Shemitah and observing the Shemitah, letting the land lie fallow, it has the ability to liberate the holiness of the land, and as a consequence, spill over and liberate holiness and ruchnius, godliness. Ooh, that sounds awful in English, doesn't it? Throughout the entire world. Wow, this phrase I really like, because Shemitah has the ability to draw a revelation of the timelessness of heaven, a place where time doesn't apply, and import timelessness, limitless, into a world where limitedness does apply. But Shofta, or it's the land will lie fallow, and that allows a physical land to seem to perform in a spiritual way. And that's why Shemitah is connected, as it said in the Pasuk, on to Mount Sinai. It said at the beginning of the Pasuk that Shemitah is, and we quickly to remind ourselves what we said, the Rabashal Moshe Behar Sinai on Mount Sinai. Then it talks about Shemitah. Then why does it connect to Shemitah? It says it's last emes because it's telling you that Har Sinai, when God touched the world through keeping Shemitah, God's able to touch the world again or be revealed into the world. Fine. And that's when the Jews observe Shemitah. Fine. We can leave the last emes, but that's going to be a very important introduction to us, to the concept. And I think we should move straight to the Alshich. Now remember, before we move on, the question which was raised by Mark Twain, no less. Of course, somebody being a religious Christian from that era, around in the 19th century in America, he would know his Bible, his Tanakh, inside out. And so the imagery at the end of it, why does she sit in sackcloth, etc., is of course from Jeremiah and from Echo, as we sing, well, how is the Jewish people reduced to that? And how is the land reduced to that? Let's see what the Alshich has to say. So what is Shemitah all about? So the Alshich says the following thing. It's rather obvious, says the Alshich, that the 7 years that we let the land fallow is to observe, the Pasuk says, a Shabbos. The earth to observe a Shabbos? It's a question the Alshich is going to ask. Is she going to say that we, the farmers, the people who farm the land, should observe a Shabbos, a Shabbat, a Sabbath where the land doesn't do anything? It seems as though the land itself is to observe it. The land will observe a Sabbath. But I mean, land, it's just dirt, isn't it? How could it possibly observe? Why does the language of the Pasuk seem to express it, but the land's actually doing it? As though the land is a conscious, sentient being, and that clearly doesn't make any sense. Does it? Does it? Well, we'll see in the Alshich, in actual fact, it does. However, notice that observation of the Alshich. The way the Pasuk is written, and remember we're learning Alshich, and remember the book, the Torah, was written by God. It dictated to Moshe, he wrote it down. And God, as I keep telling you in our sharing, is good Hebrew. He doesn't make mistakes, he doesn't say oops. So when he says the land itself will observe, which presumes or suggests consciousness, that doesn't make any sense, but we'll see what it does. Let's take a very simple dip into the Alshich, and we're going to go to offer a very interesting and straightforward explanation, and then we'll get back to the sort of Kabbalistic territory that the Sfas Emes mentioned before. I'm reading the Alshich. And for those of you who might just have this volume of the Alshich. In Sophic ki kasher Shabbos Bereshis Yora Kiddush Olam. There's no doubt to answer the question what Shemitah all about. It's exactly just like the Shabbos that we keep on a weekly basis is there in order to attest the fact that God created the world and so much more. If you remember a share from just a few weeks ago, that the Alshich says, but if that was the only reason, why is it that you're Archive Misa? Technically, somebody would be literally liable to the death penalty for breaking Shabbos. If it's just to attest to the fact that God created the world, there is no concept in Judaism of somebody dying for failure to bear testimony. For giving false testimony, yes, but to fail to become a witness, to give testimony, that doesn't make any sense. And we said, if you remember the Alshich there, he said that this concept of an neshama yesera, normally translated as an extra soul. And the Alshich pointed out, if you remember, it's not an extra soul. Yesera means more. The soul that you already have expands when it comes to Shabbos to accept more of that kedusha that flows from heaven, that holiness that flows from heaven. In other words, you get much more of it on Shabbos. And so too, apparently, so does the land of Israel when it lies fallow. That's a hint to where we're going to be going. However, he says that if it's the case that Shemitah is an echo, is a second statement, reinforcing the same point that God created the world, and Shabbos, it certainly does that. After all, Shabbos is in the Ten Commandments, then why shouldn't Shemitah also be in the Ten Commandments? Why not? If that's all it's about, then say it. You should keep when 7 days, 6 days you work, it says in the Ten Commandments, the seventh is Shabbos Hashem, and similarly when it comes to Hajj. Why is it not the Shemitah in that Ten Commandments? That's a good question. So he says, well, Lama lo never show. Why is it not mentioned there? And another question that the Alshich is extremely at pains to deal with and to emphasize. You might consider that the land of Israel and the concept of the Shemitah is simply basic farming practice, agricultural husbandry. Everybody knows, and this is a concept as I'm making this recording in the United States of America during the 1920s, the famous American Dust Bowl, where the major areas of the United States that produced wheat and corn, etc., were devastated by the fact that they were over-farmed. In other words, they kept planting the same product in the field over and over and over again without giving the land a respite, because apparently Earth's soil needs a respite. And they do that, of course, these days by crop rotation. If you plant one plant, you plant a different type of plant the next year, and it takes different elements out of the soil, allowing the other elements to somehow recover themselves. I don't know how this works, of course. And they do that on an ongoing basis. Another way is simply to stop farming the land for a year, and then the next year. So you might think, as that's normal farming practice, that really the whole idea of Shemitah is just that, isn't it? I remember some reform friend of mine from many years ago in Scotland explaining to me that pork is okay because the reason that the Jews weren't allowed to eat pork in the desert was simply because pork goes off very easily, it's very toxic, and it does become spoiled, and therefore Jews aren't allowed to eat it. But now we've got refrigeration, it's perfectly okay. That's the justification of it. So you might think this is the justification of Shemitah. It's in order to preserve the vibrancy and the strength of the earth. That's why I keep saying it's on Mount Sinai. One of the reasons it says Shemitah is Mount Sinai. This is to do with God, it's not to do with animal husbandry. And we'll see that shortly, because the Alshich points out, because how can you 6 consecutive years? 6 consecutive years of land giving food? That would make no sense. It would be exhausted by then. But you're allowed to, in a completely year after year basis, farm the land without any difficulty whatsoever. But when it comes to Shabbos, boom, it's got to stop. So it's not, says the Alshich, to do with that. Okay, so then it says, as an explanation, the Alshich explains why, what it's really about. And he says, everybody knows where it says in Bereshis. In Bereshis, the first Rashi, we discussed this not too long ago, Rashir. The first Rashi in the Chumash questions why the Torah has to begin with Bereshis at all. The Jews are really only interested in mitzvahs, says Rashi. The first mitzvah appears in the book of Exodus and Shemais, when it says, the month of Nisan should be the first of the months. So let's just focus on the mitzvahs, because Jews are about 613 of those. So why do we need Bereshis at all? To which Rashi answers with the famous answer: in order to give you ammunition when the world points and says your Jews are a bunch of thieves who stole the land of Israel from the original inhabitants of the land of Israel, and therefore it's taken illegitimately, then you're supposed to turn around and point at Genesis and say, no, God created the world. It was His. It is His. He gave it to them. They misbehaved. Took it and give it to us. So that's that. It's ours. That was the answer. Ramban says that what Rashi really means is that you'll never really understand Bereshit properly. So you would focus on the bits of Torah which would give you a full understanding of the mitzvahs, as opposed to the idea of Odom Rishon and Gan Eden, which is way, way beyond our comprehension. Fine. That's what Rashi says there. So if that's the justification for them giving the land of Israel, rather citing the creation, God's creation of the world, to justify the giving of the land of Israel to the Jewish people, then there's another point here. You see, that's testified to by the fact that God tells us to keep Shabbos. So the Jewish people are making that a testament giving that testimony every single week. But there's something extra here, and that's the land of Israel itself. As Rashi says, we claim, I remember many years ago watching on TV an interview with, if I remember rightly, it was Shimon Peres. And Shimon Peres, I think this was way back in the 70s, and there was a BBC interviewer. So naturally, you can expect a less than sympathetic interview, although, to be fair, it was fair. And he asked them the following question: I can understand that the state of Israel being founded as a homeland for the Jews is because it's their historic homeland and a biblical mandate as they see it. But you're not religious, Mr. Peres. So from your point of view, why are you here? Why are the Jewish people here? Why are secular Jews here? And I must admit, remembering that Shimon Peres stumbled and stammered and struggled to supply a really good reason for that. But if you're religious Jew, you can point to this. Now, the world might not accept that argument. I'm sure the world will not accept the argument. But the point, at least you can say the Jews do believe that. They believe it was given by God. And the proof of the pudding is the fact they even keep Shemitah. The fact they even keep Shemitah. They don't use the land in the 7th year when there's no food, or there might not be any food for them to eat. That's a complete proof of the fact that they believe it. Let me read a little bit of the Alshich to you. When you come to the land of Shar Ani, which I'm given, it said the Pasuk land of Shiuraki Ani Nisan Isa Ve'enanis. So I am giving it to them. The fact I'm giving it to them, I can easily stop giving it to them. I've stopped giving it to them in the past, something we'll come back to shortly. And then they're not thieves because it's mine. If they're giving it, it's because if they've got it, it's because I'm giving it to them. Not that they stole it, Nachlas got the inheritance of other people's. It's not other people's, it's mine. But Al Kain, the Shabta Oretz Atzmo, and Neshon Asati Shabbos Hashem, and the land itself will testify to that and rest. Lahiris as a testimony, Ihu Yisbarach Baram Hunas. God gave it, and God can take it away, but He's giving it to the Jewish people. Okay, in Sarach As Zecher Gam Bechutz L'Oretz. But that's why we don't keep Shemitah outside the land of Israel. I mean, if it's just like Shabbos and it's testifying that God created the world, well, we keep Shabbos everywhere in the world. Jews live in New York, Jews live in London or in Moscow, Ukraine, being fair. Then we keep Shabbos. Whether it's in a Muslim country, a Christian country, or communist China, we keep Shabbos. Wherever we go in the world, we make that statement. But the fact that we only keep Shemitah in the land of Israel is to testify to that fact that God gave the land to us. And the proof is that we give it to we give it back, as it were, to God when it comes to Shemitah. And the Kuzri makes this as a very famous argument to the fact that the Torah is divine and authentic, because he says, if you wanted to create a new religion, And there's no shortage of new religions that, recent religions, at least historically so. Baha'i is a recent religion. Mormonism is a recent religion in America. But if you were making up a religion, if you wanted to start your own today, there's money in it, then you would surely not make a part of the religion something that will be exposed as a lie very quickly, so that your whole financial empire will be exposed. The fellas walking about in the street saying the end is nigh. And also a cartoon of this, all these placards walking down the street in Manhattan. The end is nigh. The world will end in 2 weeks' time. Someone says, no, it's going to end in 3. Well, another one, he bumps into another guy. Well, it's going to end in 3 weeks' time. Well, whichever way you look at it, in 4 weeks' time, both of them seem to be idiots. Just regenerate themselves. But what if it were to be the case that Moses, as some cynics and skeptics say, wrote the book himself? Of course, a careful analysis of the Torah from the eyes of the Talmud would prove that to be, would expose that as being nonsense straight away. However, but if you were to say that, would he write in it a condition that, you know what, you're going into the land of Israel and you're going to let the land fallow, there's going to be a miraculous doubling of the yield of the crop in the 6th year, so the not just a doubling, a tripling, so you'll have food in the 6th year and the 7th year, but it's fallow, and the 8th year waiting for the new crop to arrive. Well, the first time the Jewish people did that and it flopped, apart from starving to death, end of Jewish people, it would also be the end of the Jewish religion. Oh, it's not true. You see, it's not true. The fact that you would actually put that into place would be an obvious demand that it has to be true or it would fail and fall straight away. But the important thing is that the Jewish people believed it. That, as it were, would satisfy even the most cynical BBC journalist, at least in those days, the 70s, perhaps not today, and that allows us to lay claim to the land of Israel. Okay, so that's why the pasuk at the end of it says it's to be a Shabbos to Hashem, not a Shabbos to the land, not a Shabbos as it were of crop rotation. No, the whole thing is about observing this as testimony to the fact that we believe we've got a right to be there. It was given to us by God. Okay. The Alshich goes on and says, as I mentioned before, and anyway, the proof of the pudding is in the fact that it's nothing to do with crop rotation. You're allowed to sow the land and use the land for 6 years consecutively. It's only 1 year which is there for a completely different purpose, for a religious purpose. Now, the Alshich says something which takes us back to the territory, the more Kabbalistic territory of the sense. So let me read this little bit to you, and this is page Reish Gimel. So here, when it says Daber El Bnei Yisrael, so when the Polar Pasuk says Daber El Bnei Yisrael, let's get the Pasuk up again so we remind ourselves what we're saying. So it says, V'yadaber Hashem Moshe Behar Sinai, or Hashem says to Moshe and Sinai, say, Daber El Bnei Yisrael, but Amarta Alein, speak to them and say to them, Kisaba El Oretz Asher Anina Selik. When you're coming to the land, shouldn't I say when you're going to the land? Just coming. Almost coming back, actually. This is what the Alshich says. O Perish Ra'ama V'daber El Bnei Yisrael Asher Amarta L'chol Haskir Har Sinai. It's saying, when you're speaking to them, mention Mount Sinai. To say what? I spoke to you in Mount Sinai. And this whole concept of Shemitah, it was mentioned in Har Sinai. Why so important for it to be contextualized or sourced to Mount Sinai? What I'm talking to you about was said in Mount Sinai. Say to them, on Mount Sinai, I told you the land should lie. I'm going to explain to you. Because the land itself acquires a special kedusha, a special revelation. It's back to the sasken, it's blowing on the ember so that the coal, so that the flame is released from it. By letting the land lie fallow, you're doing exactly that on the 7th year. There's now going to be a doubling or tripling of the holiness, which is evident in the land of Israel, when the Jewish people let it lie fallow. Because it should be on the Shabbos. As a Jewish person gets extra, her soul grows in Shabbos to expand, to accept an extra pouring in of Kedusha into the vessel, into the Kevi and Shabbos. Then the exact same thing occurs when it comes to the land of Israel. There's more Kedusha there. And you can see it because there's miraculous stuff happening here. After all, the role of the Jewish people is to inspire the rest of the world. Just imagine when the Jewish people, and the BBC journalists, is not only able to see the Jewish people keeping Shemitah as clear evidence that at least they believe it's true, but suppose they actually see that it's true, the world sees that it's true, that the land produces a triple crop in the 6th year, to see them all the way through. Then, wow, when we get it right, the world gets it right, and as fast as it's said before, then our keeping of Shemitah, the land of Israel's testimony, then spreads over and inspire the whole world. Behar is taking a Kedusha to Shana Sashis, the land of Israel gets next to the Kedusha land of Israel, just like in the 7th year, just like we do every 7th day. How came Hisker Sinai, Hisham, Shras Shkina? And you say, how could such a thing happen? That's why the mitzvah of Shemitah, as the Alshich, is connected and keeps emphasizing it happened in Mount Sinai. It was given in Mount Sinai because Mount Sinai itself, when God was there, it transformed itself. It was a place of holiness, and therefore, same thing. And the same concept applies here. Sinai, Hisham, Shkina, because they are the Shekhinah, the presence of God was there behind us. And then God, therefore, in Mount Sinai gave the whole of the Torah, the whole big deal, the whole, foundation of the Jewish people. That incredible event was because God was there. So therefore, Kedusha flowed. The Kedusha will flow here as well. But you turn around as the Alshich says, say, oh, that's different. Because God was there, the Shekhinah was there, and angels and all the Kabbalistic stuff. And we saw the letters of the Torah coming down, black flame and light flame background, etc. That's why it contained, or it got Kedusha. How does that apply here? And such a thing that you're arguing occurs on this 7-year cycle. To which the Alshich says, the answer is very simple. Ki sobol oretz, as the Pasuk says, or Pasuk says, when you come to the land, Asher ani nosein, because I'm giving it. Because the land of Israel was never given, it's an ongoing giving. So my Kedusha is there, and doubly and triply there when you keep Shemitah. Okay, because the land of Israel, its Kedusha is doubled and tripled when you've come there. When you've come there, you've come back there. Why? It's now doubled because you will make it holy. So we'll go back to our question from Mark Twain. How did this land, which is, well, the earth is good land, be so miserable? Let's remind ourselves of that quote, if I can get my tablet to work again. Yeah. A solitary village for 30 miles. When you come into the Galilee, it's forlorn. Jericho lies a moldering ruin. Bethlehem and Bethany in their poverty and tribulation, untenanted by any living creature. A desolate country. The soil is rich enough, but it's given over wholly to weeds. Silent, mournful expanse. A desolation. Hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, the fast friends of the worthless soil, have almost deserted the country. A dismal scenery of Palestine. The hills barren and dull. Swarms of beggars. And malformation. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes, desolate and unholy, because the land of Israel connects to the Jewish people. The Jewish people connect to the land of Israel, and together, then the land of Israel blossoms. And visit the land of Israel now and travel from the Lebanese border to Jerusalem, and you would not be able to count the trees. And it's incredibly verdant and produces an incredible amount in connection with the Jewish people. That's nothing if only the Jewish people would get it right, as they've not quite got it right yet in keeping Shemitah there strong, but many farmers do keep Shemitah. But let me read on here because it's getting exciting, as you can see, because I'm getting excited. When you come to the land, when you're going to the land, it doesn't say when you're going to the land, it says when you're coming to the land. Why? Because as though you're coming back to the land. Because the source, the root of your soul is in the land of Israel. The land of Israel, we believe, in particular Yerushalayim, is the closest point. Imagine the globe, and imagine the top, not the North Pole, but where the temple's Mount Our Maria sits, the Temple Mount. That is the point where heaven and earth kiss. And the Kedusha that flows to the world flows there first, and then out elsewhere. It's also the point of access to the souls of the Jewish people. So when we reconnect at the source point, then that multiplies our Kedusha. We reignite, we blow, go back to the Sfas Emes words, we blow on that ember, and the flame bursts forth the land of Israel, the land of Palestine, as he called it, but the land of Israel then fulfills its full potential, and the crops start to grow a little bit more. Because the holiness from heaven hovers over Israel, and particularly in Yerushalayim, and particularly in Har Habayis, ready to flow and flowing down to the world. As to say that really the whole source of the point of connection between heaven and earth is there. Okay, but the call Malcolm Asher Yeska Licha, Eloretz Omar Loshen Bia. That's why it says in the Jewish people, coming to the land of Israel, you're coming to where you belong. You're coming to the source of your soul. And as your soul increases, so too does the holiness of the land. That's why it says in our posit, when you come to the land, because there you will join, you reconnect to your source, and the shamas from Echem, which are attached to heaven, and that will spread out to the land of Israel as well. And that takes us on to our conclusion, which is the book of Megillah Shris. Megillah Shris says, "Vahi b'mishvat hashoftim, vahi ra'ov ba'aretz." And it was when the days when the judges judged, vahi ra'ov ba'aretz, and there was a bad thing in the land. Vahi is always something bad's going to happen. So here, the strange thing is we get two. Vahi b'mishvat hashoftim, and the days when the judges judged, vahi ra'ov ba'aretz, and there was a famine in the land. So the famine in the land now reduced. There's a picture you can imagine from Mark Twain's account. Why? Something bad's going to happen. So what is the bad thing? By he, something bad's going to happen? Oh, there's a famine in the land. No, it's got its own by he. Again, by he, b'mishvat shoftim, by he ra'ov ba'aretz, there's a famine in the land. And the Alshich says there, you see, when it says, and it was in the days when the judges judged, what else did judges do? Written by Shmuel. Shmuel is a Novi. Like Moshe, he's writing down the dictation that God is dictating to him. So every word counts. In days when the judges judged, what else do judges do? In days when the judges played tennis? I mean, what does that mean? Of course, judges judge, but the Alshich says it was days when they judged their judges. In the Parshas itself, in the Torah, it says that the Mina Hadayonim Hakshem, the appointment of kosher judges in and of itself, is enough to keep the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. When we go there and do the stuff that we're meant to be doing as Jews, we make a debt to our souls and keep the mitzvahs. And then the land which I am giving keeps on being given. But if we don't, if we fail in that, if we judge our judges, and the judges are talking about Dayani, if a bit like the United States of America today, people don't like what the Supreme Court says, they demonstrate and intimidate and threaten inside their court, in their homes, then it's indeed that's exactly what happened at the time of Elimelech and his family's removal from the land of Israel in the Rus story, in the story of Rus. They would no longer listen to their judges, but if you're not listening to the judges, not listening to the Torah, that provokes the second Vahi, something bad in the land, a famine, which makes people leave. So when we come to the land of Israel, we connect, and the Jewish people are getting it right, the land of Israel is getting it right. And the land itself, consciously, a sentient entity, as it were, then it will produce this massive blessing, this open miracle, which can spill over and ignite the world to see godliness, Kedusha, etc., all these words. But we've got to be in the land of Israel. When we do it right, we get back to the land of Israel. As we connect with the land of Israel, connects the land of Israel to its full potential, which spills over and connects the world and everybody in it to their spiritual potential as well. I shall see you hopefully Wednesday or Thursday this week, because I'm not going to England this week, and hopefully our show will be on time. I wish you all a good Shabbos. If I don't see you for next year, but if I do, I wish you a good Shabbos then.